What if I told you that Carl Jung discovered a way to see through anyone's mask in just 2 questions? What if the person sitting across from you right now is hiding something so fundamental about themselves that even they don't know it? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at people the same way again. You think you know people, don't you? You think you can read them, understand their motivations, predict their behavior. But Carl Jung said something that will shatter this illusion completely. According to Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But here's what most people miss: Jung discovered that our true character isn't revealed in our successes, our achievements, or even our failures. It's revealed in something far more subtle, far more telling. And I'm about to show you exactly how to uncover it. Carl Jung spent over 5 decades studying the human psyche, and what he discovered will disturb you. He found that every person wears what he called a persona, a mask we present to the world. But beneath this mask lies something Jung termed the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. But here's where it gets interesting, and why you need to pay attention to every word I'm about to say. Jung discovered that when we're comfortable, when we're in control, we can maintain our persona perfectly. We can be whoever we want to appear to be. But there are 2 specific moments, 2 precise psychological triggers, where this mask inevitably slips. And that's where Jung's 2 questions come in. According to Carl Jung, these moments reveal more about a person's character than years of observation. Why? Because they bypass the conscious mind and tap directly into what Jung called the unconscious complexes that drive our behavior. But before I reveal these questions, you need to understand something crucial that Jung discovered about human nature. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is the key to understanding why these questions work so devastatingly well. Jung discovered that our personality has multiple layers. The persona, our public mask. The ego, our conscious self. The personal unconscious, our repressed experiences. The shadow, our rejected traits. The collective unconscious, universal human patterns. Now here's what's fascinating, and why you absolutely cannot click away right now. According to Carl Jung, when certain psychological triggers are activated, we bypass the persona and ego completely. We react from what Jung called our authentic self, the raw, unfiltered version of who we really are. And Jung identified 2 specific triggers that work every single time. The first trigger relates to what Jung discovered about projection. He found that we unconsciously project our own shadow traits onto others. When we criticize someone, we're often revealing our own hidden characteristics. The second trigger involves what Jung called the inflation of the ego. When our sense of self is threatened or elevated beyond normal bounds, our true character emerges from behind the mask. But you're probably wondering, what are these actual questions? Hold on, because the way you ask them matters more than the questions themselves. Question 1: What kind of person do you absolutely cannot stand? Now, listen carefully to how Jung would interpret this, because most people get this completely wrong. Carl Jung discovered that what we hate most in others is actually a reflection of our own shadow, the parts of ourselves we've rejected and refused to acknowledge. He called this psychological projection, and it's one of the most reliable ways to see someone's true character. When someone answers this question, they're not really telling you about other people, they're giving you a roadmap to their own psychological blind spots. But here's where it gets really interesting, and why you need to pay attention to the specific words they use. According to Carl Jung, the more emotional someone gets when describing what they hate in others, the more likely it is that they possess these very traits themselves. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Let me give you some examples of what Jung discovered. If they say they hate dishonest people, Jung would suggest this person likely struggles with their own relationship to truth. They may lie to themselves regularly or have episodes of deception they haven't acknowledged. If they say they hate selfish people, Carl Jung discovered this usually indicates someone who has repressed their own needs and desires so completely that they can't tolerate seeing others express what they deny in themselves. If they say they hate weak people, Jung found this almost always reveals someone who is terrified of their own vulnerability and has built their entire identity around appearing strong. But here's the crucial part that Jung discovered, and why this question is so revealing. The shadow doesn't just contain negative traits, it contains any trait we've learned to reject in ourselves. Sometimes people will say they hate show-offs or people who are too happy. Jung discovered this reveals someone who has suppressed their own joy or confidence. Now, the second question is even more revealing, because it catches people when their guard is completely down. Question 2, tell me about a time when you were absolutely certain you were right about something, but it turned out you were wrong. Now, this is where Carl Jung's genius really shows, because this question reveals something most people never see about themselves. Jung discovered that how someone handles being wrong reveals their true character more than how they handle being right. Why? Because being wrong threatens what Jung called the ego ideal, our image of ourselves as competent and knowledgeable. According to Carl Jung, when our ego ideal is threatened, we have several unconscious defense mechanisms that kick in. Denial, they'll claim they weren't really wrong, just that circumstances changed. Rationalization, they'll create elaborate explanations for why their wrongness was actually reasonable. Projection, they'll blame others for misleading them. Minimization, they'll claim it wasn't important anyway. But here's what Jung discovered that will blow your mind. The people with the strongest character, according to Jung, don't use these defense mechanisms at all. Instead, they do something Jung called holding the tension of opposites. They can acknowledge being wrong without their entire self-image collapsing. Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And the people who can honestly examine their mistakes are the ones actively becoming their authentic selves. But pay attention to these specific responses, because Jung discovered they reveal crucial character traits. If they can't think of an example, Jung would say this person lives in such denial that they've constructed an elaborate fantasy about their own infallibility. This is what Jung called psychological inflation, when the ego becomes so rigid it can't tolerate any imperfection. If they immediately blame external factors, Carl Jung discovered this indicates someone who has an external locus of control. They believe life happens to them rather than through them. These people rarely take genuine responsibility for anything. If they get defensive while answering, Jung found this reveals someone whose entire self-worth is built on being right. Their identity is so fragile that admitting error feels like psychological death. If they can laugh about their mistake, according to Carl Jung, this indicates psychological maturity and what he called integration, the ability to accept both positive and negative aspects of themselves. But here's the most important thing Jung discovered about this question. Carl Jung said, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Jung discovered that these two questions work because they force people to look inside, even when they think they're talking about external things. The first question makes them reveal their shadow projections, and the second question reveals their relationship with their own fallibility. But Jung found something even more profound, and this is why you absolutely must understand this concept. According to Carl Jung, people fall into predictable patterns based on how they answer these questions. 1. The inflated ego type. These people project all negative traits onto others and cannot admit mistakes. Jung discovered these individuals are actually the most insecure, building elaborate defenses against their own shadow material. 2. The self-deprecating type. These people claim to hate traits they actually possess, and over-admit to mistakes. Jung found this is also a defense mechanism. By acknowledging flaws superficially, they avoid dealing with them deeply. 3. The integrated type. These rare individuals can acknowledge both their projections and their mistakes without their self-image collapsing. Jung called this psychological integration, the hallmark of mental health. Now, here's where Jung's insight becomes practically invaluable. Carl Jung discovered that once you understand someone's pattern, you can predict their behavior with startling accuracy. Why? Because Jung found that people are far more consistent than they appear, they just express their core patterns in different ways depending on the situation. But there's something even more important Jung discovered, and if you're still watching, you need to hear this. Carl Jung spent decades studying what he called the dark side of human nature, and he discovered specific warning signs that appear when you ask these questions. Red flag 1, they project all negative traits onto specific groups. Jung discovered that healthy people recognize negative traits across all types of people. When someone consistently projects onto one group, political party, gender, race, profession, Jung found this indicates dangerous psychological splitting. Red flag 2, they've never been wrong about anything important. According to Carl Jung, this level of denial indicates what he called psychological inflation, a dangerous detachment from reality that often precedes major life crises. Red flag 3, their energy completely changes when discussing what they hate. Jung discovered that sudden shifts in energy indicate you've hit a major shadow complex. The more dramatic the shift, the more repressed material you've uncovered. Red flag 4, they turn the questions back on you aggressively. Carl Jung found that people who immediately deflect these questions are often hiding the most significant shadow material. But here's what Jung discovered that might be the most important insight of all. Carl Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Jung discovered that these questions don't just reveal character, they actually change people. Why? Because the act of honest self-reflection is what Jung called the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self. And this is why you need to be careful how you use this knowledge. According to Carl Jung, when you see someone's shadow material, you have a choice: you can use it to manipulate them, or you can use it to understand them more deeply. Jung discovered that manipulation creates what he called psychological poison. It corrupts both the manipulator and the manipulated. But when you use these insights for genuine understanding, Jung found something remarkable happens: relationships become more authentic, more honest, more real. Now, here's the part Jung discovered that will change how you see yourself. Jung realized that these questions work both ways. When you ask them of others, you're also forced to confront your own answers. When you judge someone else's projections, you're revealing your own. When you analyze how they handle being wrong, you're confronting your own relationship with fallibility. Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This isn't just a cute saying, it's the key to psychological growth. But Jung discovered something even more profound about human nature. According to Carl Jung, once you understand these psychological patterns, you can apply them in every area of your life. 1. In relationships, you can see past the persona your partner presents and understand their deeper psychological patterns. Jung discovered this leads to more authentic intimacy. 2. In business, you can identify people's core motivations and blind spots. Carl Jung found that most business conflicts arise from unacknowledged shadow projections. 3. In parenting, you can help your children develop self-awareness by modeling honest self-reflection. Jung discovered that children who learn to acknowledge their shadow early develop stronger psychological health. 4. In leadership, you can create environments where people feel safe to be authentic. According to Carl Jung, authentic leadership requires acknowledging your own shadow material first. But here's the most important thing Jung discovered. Carl Jung discovered something crucial about using psychological insights: the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Jung found that people who become skilled at reading others often use this ability to avoid looking at themselves. They become psychological voyeurs, dissecting everyone else while remaining blind to their own patterns. According to Carl Jung, this is the greatest danger of psychological knowledge. It can become another defense mechanism, another way to avoid genuine self-confrontation. Jung said, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. The same is true for self-knowledge. Your task isn't to analyze others, but to find the barriers you've built against knowing yourself. So here's my challenge to you. Carl Jung spent decades peering into the darkest corners of the human psyche, and what he discovered there wasn't comfortable. It wasn't neat. It wasn't the sanitized version of self-knowledge that most of us prefer. Instead, Jung found something far more profound and unsettling, that every person we encounter is a mirror, reflecting back aspects of ourselves we'd rather not acknowledge. But Jung understood something crucial about human nature that most people miss entirely. Before we can truly understand others, before we can read their motivations, predict their behaviors, or help them grow, we must first turn that penetrating gaze inward. We must be willing to confront the uncomfortable truths about ourselves that we spend most of our lives avoiding. This is why Jung would insist that before using his most revealing psychological insights on anyone else, you must first answer two deceptively simple questions about yourself. The first mirror: what we cannot stand. What kind of person can you absolutely not stand? Think about it for a moment. Really think. Who makes your skin crawl? Who triggers that instant, visceral reaction of disgust or irritation? Is it the arrogant know-it-all who dominates every conversation? The passive-aggressive colleague who never says what they mean? The perpetual victim who blames everyone else for their problems? The ruthlessly ambitious person who steps on others to get ahead? Whatever type of person you chose, Jung would tell you something that might make you uncomfortable. You've just revealed something fundamental about your own shadow, those aspects of your personality that you've rejected, repressed, or refused to acknowledge. Jung's concept of the shadow isn't about being evil or malicious. It's about wholeness. Every human being contains the full spectrum of human potential, capacity for both kindness and cruelty, wisdom and foolishness, strength and weakness, selflessness and selfishness. But as we develop our conscious identity, we inevitably reject certain traits, pushing them into the unconscious realm Jung called the shadow. The people who irritate us most aren't random. They're carrying traits that exist within us but that we've disowned. The arrogant person you can't stand. Look deeper. Do you have your own relationship with pride and superiority that you haven't acknowledged? The passive-aggressive person who drives you crazy? Consider whether you have your own ways of avoiding direct confrontation while still trying to control outcomes. This isn't about blame or judgment. It's about recognition. Jung discovered that our strongest reactions to others are rarely about them, they're about us. When we judge someone harshly, we're often seeing a disowned part of ourselves reflected back at us, and that recognition creates an unconscious panic that we experience as irritation, anger, or disgust. The shadow isn't our enemy, it's our teacher. It contains not just our rejected negative traits, but also positive qualities we've disowned because they didn't fit our self-image or weren't acceptable in our environment. The person whose confidence you resent might be showing you your own unexpressed power. The one whose emotional expressiveness annoys you might be reflecting your own buried capacity for feeling. The second mirror: our relationship with fallibility. Tell yourself about a time when you were absolutely certain you were right, but turned out to be wrong. This second question cuts even deeper than the first. It asks us to examine not just what we dislike in others, but how we handle one of the most challenging aspects of being human: fallibility. How do you respond when you discover you've been wrong? Do you deflect and rationalize? Do you attack the person or information that challenged your certainty? Do you retreat into shame and self-criticism? Do you double down and insist you're still right despite evidence to the contrary? Or do you pause, reflect, and genuinely consider what this moment of being wrong might teach you? Jung understood that our relationship with being wrong reveals everything about our psychological maturity. The person who cannot tolerate being wrong is trapped in a prison of their own making, forever defending a false self that must maintain the illusion of perfection. The person who collapses into shame when wrong is equally trapped, unable to separate their worth from their accuracy. But the person who can sit with being wrong, who can examine their error with curiosity rather than defensiveness, has accessed something profound. They've touched the humility that Jung saw as essential for genuine psychological growth. They've recognized that certainty is often an illusion, that our perspectives are limited, and that being wrong isn't a catastrophe, it's information. When you can honestly examine a time you were wrong, you begin to understand the psychological mechanisms that create certainty in the first place. You see how your ego constructs narratives to protect itself, how your mind selects evidence that confirms what you want to believe, how your emotional investments in being right can blind you to obvious truths. Jung's insight wasn't just academic. He discovered that only when we've honestly confronted our own shadow material can we help others confront theirs. Only when we've faced our own relationship with being wrong can we understand what others reveal when they answer these questions. This is because psychological projection works both ways. Just as we project our disowned traits onto others, we also project our own psychological processes. If you haven't examined your own shadow, you'll see shadows everywhere except where they actually exist. If you haven't grappled with your own fallibility, you'll misjudge how others handle being wrong. The person who has done this inner work develops what Jung called psychological mindedness, the ability to see beneath surface behaviors to the underlying psychological dynamics. They can recognize when someone's anger is really fear, when someone's arrogance is really insecurity, when someone's rigidity is really terror of chaos. But more importantly, they develop compassion. When you've seen your own capacity for self-deception, for rationalization, for defending the indefensible, you stop being surprised or judgmental when others do the same. You recognize these behaviors not as character flaws but as universal human strategies for managing psychological pain. Jung's ultimate insight wasn't about becoming expert at reading people, it was about becoming expert at reading yourself. Because when you truly understand your own psychological landscape, when you've mapped your own shadow and made peace with your own fallibility, something remarkable happens: other people stop being mysterious. You begin to see that the colleague who frustrates you is struggling with the same internal conflicts you are, just expressing them differently. The family member who drives you crazy is defending against the same fundamental fears you harbor. The stranger whose behavior seems incomprehensible is using different strategies to meet the same basic human needs you have. This recognition doesn't excuse harmful behavior or eliminate the need for boundaries. But it transforms your relationship with other people from one of judgment and frustration to one of understanding and, ultimately, compassion. As Jung himself said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The question isn't whether these insights will change how you see people, they will. The question is whether you're brave enough to let them change how you see yourself. Because as Jung discovered through decades of working with the human psyche, that's where the real transformation begins. In the uncomfortable, necessary, liberating work of knowing yourself completely, shadow and all. Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it. And if you'd like to go a step further in supporting this work, you can now leave a super thanks below. It's a small way to say thank you, and it truly helps keep this channel going.